Good.
Hey, everybody. I'm Nick Nigro at Atlas Public Policy, and I'm joined by my colleague, James, and we're going to do another webinar for you on electric vehicle charging use data specification. This webinar is being recorded, so in case one of your colleagues can't join or you got to jump off early, don't worry, it'll be recorded and posted on our website afterwards. So I hope everybody had a nice summer as we enter the fall. We were busy with lots of stuff, including some work in the charging use spec. James is going to do the lion's share of the talking today about the updates we did with the spec to be compatible with some recent issuances from the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. And then we're going to talk later about a survey we'd like to conduct with some of the charging use vendors and how you all can help with that. So I'm going to turn it over to James now, and he's going to run through some updates. And I will be managing the lobby and other things, Q&A along the way. If you all have questions about the work that we're trying to do with this charging spec, you can just drop them in the Q&A or the chat feature, and I'll try to answer them while James is talking. For those who are new to this effort, this is an effort that's been facilitated by Atlas Public Policy for about a handful of months right now. The goal here is to try to really consolidate efforts around collecting data for charging use programs and have a common way of doing it so that we can be more efficient with the implementation of these programs across the country, particularly around as the federal dollars start to ramp up, and also to allow for jurisdictions to be able to compare results of programs. So without further ado, let me turn it over to James, and he's going to run through what's the latest and greatest for us with the most recent updates this quarter. James?
Thanks, Nick. So hi, everyone. I'm James DiFilippo from Atlas Public Policy. Just to give you a quick run through of what we're doing today and going over today, here's our agenda. So I'm going to quickly give an overview of what the specification is. This is going to be a little bit of a review of stuff that we've already presented. Then I'm going to talk about how we've updated the specification just to align with the new NEVI guidelines that have recently come out. Then we're going to talk a little bit about reliability and grid impacts, measuring those, what the right metrics are, and that leads into designing a vendor survey as we start to think about reliability, grid impacts, and honestly, other things in the spec. We want to know what are the capacities of the software and the hardware of the charging stations that are out there right now, and what's literally coming online, and learn more about what we can expect in terms of data availability going forward. So without further ado, here's a chart overview of the charging use specification. So it's split kind of into four here. We have the core specification, and that is what you need to register, inventory, and collect data on the core use of charging stations. And what we call core here are the session data, or the station data, sorry, the site and station data. So the equipment that's in the ground that's been funded by a program, and the attributes of those sites and stations. And then from that, the sessions themselves. So this is tracking the attributes of a plug-in to plug-out event. And then in a new edition, which I'll preview a little bit, also talking about operations data as well. And then we have the glossary, of course, and type format definitions. These are kind of housekeeping items to make sure that we're all using the same vocabulary and that it's clear what is required in the specification. And then we have specific extensions. So this is going to be things like grid impacts and reliability fall into these extensions, and these are kind of modules for additional data collection. And then supplementary materials, and these supplementary materials are things like model language for contracts, and other things that are helpful, like quality, data quality assurance, data validity checks that make the use of the specification more easy to use for program administrators and for anyone who's participating in the program. And as Nick just popped up in the chat, you can find the specification on GitHub. So moving on, kind of quickly through that, the major changes that we've made since the last time we've kind of met as this group was that we've aligned the specification to the NEVI guidelines. So this was to go through and make sure that our specification reconciled with what is being asked by as to the NEVI guidelines through the proposed rulemaking. And the most major change here is that we added a table within our kind of operating data part. So this is in addition to sessions, the operating costs. And these are things that NEVI is anticipating, or NEVI program is anticipating collecting, which includes maintenance cost, repair cost, electricity dispersal, and network costs. This does add a little bit of complexity to reporting in the way that we have set up the spec, in that these costs are not likely to be reporting through a charging network provider, which is where typically you get information from about sessions. This would be coming from the site hosts in most cases. And so the spec has also been updated to reflect that this is likely to be where those data come from. And it also generates an additional concept of a reporting period, because unlike sessions, which kind of report on an individual session and can be aggregated to any dimension, these data are reported over a period. So this is during a reporting period. So we've also defined reporting periods. And so that's the major addition that we've made, and the largest structural change to the specification. We've also made some minor changes to add to existing tables. So in the site registration table, we've added several new fields for on-site generation and storage, which are called for in the NEVI proposed rulemaking. Also, we've added explicit session and charge end timestamps. So initially, we had this as explicit charge starts and session and charge start within reporting a session time or charge end time. Duration. Those duration fields are still in there, but now we've also included a session and charge end time, so that there are 4 timestamps for each charging session. And then we've added a new successful completion field to the session reporting table. So this is just an indicator of whether or not the session completed as expected. So either through a plug out or through cessation of charging, as opposed to some other error or fault out. And those are kind of the changes that have been needed. We did this cross-reference between what NEVI requires and what we had already had in the spec, and there was already substantial overlap. So we think that these small changes that we've made put us in specific alignment, and using the specification as we have written it should satisfy data reporting requirements as proposed in the proposed rulemaking. So moving from there into our next topic, we have two additional, as I was talking about, kind of modules that we're planning to add to this specification. The first is on reliability, and reliability is both very important but also complicated. And so one of the things we wanted to bring to this group for discussion is answering the questions: what is reliability? How do we measure it? And so here we have listed a couple things that we think define reliability in our sense, which is that a customer can successfully initiate a session. And that can mean that not just that they're able to get a charge, but that the station is not broken, that the cord works, that the connector works, that their payment can go through, that it can negotiate with the charging network and the vehicle. Essentially, if they pull up and plug in, can they get a charge? Kind of a correlator to that is that the session terminates with a plug out or complete charge, and that is that the session doesn't error out for any other reason, and that the user gets the energy that they expect. And the last one here we said is that the charger delivers expected power levels, and this is mostly germane, I think, to or we think to the DC fast chargers, but also matters for L2, especially higher powered L2. And the question there is, does the charger deliver power that when a vehicle can accept a certain level of power and the charger is rated to deliver that power, is that amount of power being delivered? Is the power being generated? And we think this is obviously not an exhaustive list, and we're definitely interested in hearing opinions about how reliability should be measured. But thus far, kind of the key metric for reliability that has been used is uptime, which is kind of a vague idea and doesn't necessarily measure these dimensions reliably well. And so the question we're putting out to discussion today in this meeting, and then in continuing conversations, is any of you might want to engage with us, is are there additional or better metrics that the industry could use? And then to the point of us wanting to do this survey, what can hardware and software currently measure? The next kind of module we're talking about is grid impacts. And so this is the question of, when we're doing reporting data, can we report data that's useful to grid operators, to utilities, to be able to do planning for future infrastructure build out, for current infrastructure? And so the questions here really are, what are the reliable ways to measure grid impact? And so currently utilities often use 15-minute interval data, but it's not consistently available at the charger or site level. And it's not necessarily available in the same kind of AMI format that a utility is used to. And we also have the question of, under which circumstances is it important to measure grid impacts for L2 charging? Is it, if you have a large site with many chargers, is that someplace where it would be important? Are level 2 charging, is the grid impacts of level 2 charging great enough? In what extent should it be tracked? And then similar to the last slide, what can current and soon to be released EVSE measure and report? Which follows us into, moving along briskly here, and I apologize if the pace is a little too fast, our idea of surveying vendors. And so we plan on fielding a survey of hardware vendors. And it's going to be people who make L2 and DC fast charging equipment and networks that field them. And those questions really are going to include questions about, what can the hardware and software do? Can you monitor your stations? We think that most can. That seems to be a pretty common capability. How and what metrics of power and energy usage monitoring are available? What kind of physical sensors might exist? So this is, do you have sensors on your charging equipment that can detect cord damage or damage elsewhere to your equipment? And then speaking to the power delivery question that we posed in reliability, do you have the capability to be able to take information from the vehicle, what has been requested by the vehicle, relating it to what station capacity is, and then also being able to say how much power is actually delivered? So if you have a 150 kilowatt station and the vehicle is asking for 150 kilowatts, are you delivering 150 kilowatts? And the last here is failure modes and reporting, and what those error codes might be, to look for any kind of overlap or any standardization opportunities. And I'm going to pass it back over to Nick to kind of talk about what we're asking for you guys today in this discussion.
Right on. Thanks, James. So, folks, I see some folks are starting to put some things in the chat. This is great. We want the discussion to get going. We reserve this time not just for us to share updates with the community about where the spec is going, but we also want to hear from you wherever possible. I set this meeting settings to allow folks to come off mute and chat with us, or turn on their video if they feel so inclined. So you're not restricted to just doing chats and cute questions and answers. So as we enter the sort of discussion phase of this meeting, it'd be great if folks could chime in as they see fit to offer some feedback or questions and opinions. With this survey in particular, what we're trying to do is get our arms around what is possible today. There's going to be unprecedented money going into charging infrastructure in the next 12 to 36 months. And there's no doubt there's going to be requirements around measuring reliability, collecting data, etc. A lot of these are spelled out in NEVI in some way, shape, or form. There's also going to be continued state programs, utility programs, etc. It's just going to be a lot of activity for all of us to be involved in. And with the spec, we're trying to make sure that there's some commonality and common understanding of how that information is being collected so it can be used in a consistent and reliable way. What we found is some programs that have been put out there, vendors have had a hard time. In vendors, I mean EVSE manufacturers, charging network operators, et cetera, have had a hard time complying. Basically, they can't really measure some of the things they're being asked to measure. And so what we want to do with this survey is put out there what is actually possible, not just today, but within the next 12 to 18 months, which is effectively the time cycle for getting new equipment out there. That stuff's already been engineered, developed. It's in the testing phase or early stage manufacturing. So that's what we're going to have for the next few years in terms of equipment out there for programs. So if the requirements for those programs exceed what the equipment can do, then it's going to be hard for any vendors to comply, and it's going to reduce competition and perhaps lead to results that we all are trying to avoid right now. On the other hand, understanding what is coming in the near future is helpful too for program implementers so that they can know at what stage they can roll in certain requirements. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with this vendor survey, establish a state of play, if you will. And so to do that, there aren't that many vendors per se, but we want to get good feedback. So we're going to hopefully get support of you fine folks in distributing the survey and encouraging the vendors to fill it out so that we get good feedback and response rate, and also to help inform the questions that we ask. So that's part of the purpose of this call. And then some content we'll be sharing with you all shortly afterwards on a draft of the survey. And so right now, I'd love to open it up if folks have some thoughts they want to share, either on some of the updates James sent or this survey concept, or other things that we should be on the lookout for when it comes to constructing or implementing the survey. Does anybody want to offer some feedback? I see some friendly faces on the, or at least friendly names on the call here. I don't want to call on people, but I could. So does anybody have any things they want to ask right now? James, maybe you want to start by addressing. Yes, go ahead, Sylvan.
Hi, this is Sylvan Hoover with ODOT. I appreciate
All right.
You all looking at the question of power delivery and requesting vehicle status versus actual delivery. Does that affect your spec? Because it could potentially be like a time series of data points that you'd want to be recording over the course of a charging session, whereas sort of the charging session spec seems to be really more about sort of a conclusion of session summary of what occurred. And how is it intended that what you'll get from the vendors sort of be an addendum to the current spec, or would it try to be rolled into one of the tables you all currently have?
It's a really good question, particularly about whether or not this is something that needs to be normalized. I think for this particular metric, we can probably come up with a methodology that will give a summary metric of whether or not, it might be a rolled up version of that interval data. It's a question for the networks and for the hardware as well of how available this information is. But it could also be, as you mentioned, like in the same kind of interval sense of tracking power delivery is just that, those 3 data points of what is the vehicle requesting. Well, I guess it's 2 data points since one should mostly be the same. The vehicles or the nameplate capacity of the charging station, what is being asked for and what is being delivered.
Do other folks want to share some thoughts on this survey? Recommend suggestions for us, things that they think we should make sure we ask, or things that they think we should be aware of as we try to undertake this? I was hoping Sylvan would break the ice here and make folks a little less shy. That's okay. James, you want to go to the next slide?
So, I mean, that's more or less just asking people to contribute
Yeah.
and get involved.
Yeah.
But there are other pathways.
Yeah, indeed. So we're doing these quarterly webinars just to provide some a predictable cadence on how often we're reaching out to folks to give them an update on what we're doing with the spec effort and ways for you to get involved. But you know, this is an ongoing project, and it will there's ways you can get connected with us and participate online at any time that's convenient for you. As I linked to in the chat, the spec is on GitHub. It lives there. You're welcome to put comments or edits directly in GitHub. It's an open source concept here with the spec. However, if you want to, if you want to just send us emails, that's okay. Just know that because we're trying to follow an open source approach, those emails that portions of the email that you allow are going to be put on GitHub as comments for everyone, for others to see. You can send us those comments via email at the info@evchargingspec.org. And yeah, so moving ahead, we're going to put together a draft of this survey. We really would appreciate more input from the community. We've already had some sidebar conversations with some of you folks ahead of this meeting that helped inform the content you've already seen, but we welcome more input as we put together a draft and send it out for some comment and feedback from you all before we actually try to issue it and get it out there. And again, we'll really be hoping that you all can help us with distributing that survey, or at least pinging some of your contacts at these vendors to make sure that we get good participation rate, because that's going to benefit all of us. James, we got a question for you about this, or us about the survey. For your survey to vendors, are you thinking of including the software-only vendors? Some EVSE OEMs are providing an open charger. So the answer, Sejal, is yes. Yes, we want to try to get anybody that's a potential participant in these programs to be a participant in the survey. And so, yeah, we'll be reaching out to network providers, equipment manufacturers, and any of those vendors in between. And so to that end, you know, we could send out a draft list of who we think is in that list of folks, or you all can also send us suggestions of folks that that we should make sure we reach out to, particularly people who you think might actually fill out the survey, because getting people to fill out a survey is never that easy.
Yeah, and just to add to that, while yes, the limitations of the hardware and what it can measure within physical sensors is a big limitation, software development isn't free. And so any limitations of the software, or that different software might have in taking inputs from sensors on board a charger and actually producing reportable metrics need to be taken into account.
Great question. Anyone else have questions or feedback they want to offer here? So just to reiterate, we're going to be sending out some draft materials for you all to review shortly. We're going to hope to get this survey out fairly soon so that it can help inform the program designs that are ongoing, and we can fold that feedback into the spec as we try to build out that portion of it, on the portion of the spec on reliability and grid integration. Anything else you want to add, James? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd also like to just make sure to keep open as well the questions about grid impact and about reliability, and that we don't think that we necessarily have all the answers in terms of how those should be measured. And so we are looking for the opinion of others in the industry about what is important to track, so that we can make sure that in our survey, we're asking the right questions about whether those things are possible to measure.
Great. Is there anything else folks want to add before we go?
Hi, Nick
Awesome.
and James. This is John.
Hey, John.
From the Joint Office. Sorry, I was late.
All good.
The Joint Office has an interest of naturally in reliability, and we're planning some activities. So definitely great to hear that you're doing the same. We should put our heads together to make sure that we're aligned. Also, James, your comment about ease of measurement or possibility for measuring certain things. That's a huge challenge, but we don't want to stick with the current state. The goal is to challenge industry to measure what needs to be measured, not just live with what is currently being looked at. That's a big can of worms that I just wanted to throw out there. Like let's not just take what we can get, but let's set our sights as high as possible. What needs to be measured to increase reliability, and then we'll build our data reporting around that.
So I think one of the things, thanks, John, that's a really important point. One of the things that the survey will also provide is the ability to do a gap analysis to say, what do we want, what is really important, and what is currently not possible with either hardware or software limitations. And then, being able to try and force that technology through whatever levers we have available, I think is going to be good policy going forward, as long as those outputs that we're looking for are useful and are worth pushing for.
Right. Forgive me if I missed it, but does Atlas have an interest in ongoing surveys of this nature, or more specifically, getting involved in measuring customer sentiment, or trying to track reliability from the customer's perspective? So maybe there's not a technological solution, but maybe there's ways we could get data from their
I
perspective.
think, John, what you brought up right now is an important facet of what James was speaking to. What exactly do we want to measure here? We can measure things with software, we can measure things with hardware. There are other ways of measuring things to determine how reliable equipment is performing and how well it's meeting the expectation of customers. You brought up a great one in just doing sentiment analysis on customers. There are companies out there that are trying to do that. We don't want to interfere necessarily with those businesses per se as part of doing this kind of open source effort, but defining some of those potential elements in a program could be useful. I think we want to look to this group and to those broader in the industry to see if they think that that's a good part of a spec like this. We haven't actually talked about that internally. Atlas hasn't done that kind of open customer surveying before. So I don't want to commit us to something I don't think we can follow through on today.
Right.
But I love the idea of doing a periodic survey, at least of the industry folks, to see how things are changing as part of this effort. Because to James's point, what equipment's going to be available today in the next 18 months is what we have for the next few years. But the engineers are always working. And so the extent to which we can influence the next generation of product or whatever for the better of these programs, that survey can help track that. And so I think there's a good reason to try to, if we succeed with this one, to try to do it on a more frequent basis.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. One other thought I had, and apologies if someone mentioned it, maybe Lisa did already. I appreciate your recognition of what's been proposed in the NEVI notice of proposed rulemaking and updating the data spec accordingly. I'll point out the caveat that everything's still subject to change as we transition from a proposed rule to a final rule, right? So just stay tuned. Stay tuned. I'm not allowed to, nor could I even predict how things are going to shake out. So no spoilers from you today, but keep watching.
Definitely,
sure.
we believe it is accurate or is supporting it as written in the NOPR, but we will certainly be keeping an eye out for the final rule.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, John, and thanks for your support as we've tried to go through this whole process. It's a little unusual for all of us involved, but certainly worthwhile. And I think it's important to see this kind of collaboration and see government, industry, and together working on this in concert. Any other thoughts folks want to share before we go? I'm always happy to give people more time. I know we reserved longer than what we've used so far, but sure people wouldn't mind going to the next one. Yeah, thanks for putting that slide up, James. These are the folks who have currently, they're on our website. We're listing all of the people who have engaged on this effort, or at least allowed us to put their names on there. It's more specific than this list in this slide here, and appreciate that. If folks want their organization name on the website, feel free to send us a note, and we're happy to put you on there. We're just trying to make sure that everybody involved knows the breadth and scope of the group that's participating. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for participating. We'll send out an email summarizing this meeting along with a link to where folks can watch it if they weren't able to attend. And we'll be in touch soon about the survey. So I'm Nick Nigro and my colleague James. We really appreciate your time today, and we'll catch you all soon. Bye
Thank
now.
you so much, everyone. Bye.